Hi, my name is Angel. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited because today I get to tell you guys about my top 10 books for 2024. It will be no surprise that most of this list is horror, but there is a little touch of romance and a touch of thriller and a touch of sci-fi in there. So we're going to be starting obviously with the bottom, number 10, and working our way up to my top book of the year. I'm just really excited because I just get to sit here and talk about the books that I love for like 20 minutes. Without further ado, grab a drink, grab a snack. I have my little Dunkin' drink right here. This is the toasted white chocolate hazelnut iced coffee. Okay, coming in at number 10 is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I just recently read for my gothic horror reading vlog, and I really love this one simply for the writing. Like, it was absolutely beautiful and it was so atmospheric. Obviously, like, this is a classic and I can totally see why so many people love it and why it has stuck around through the years. It is not only beautifully written and atmospheric, but it's also like this romantic gothic thriller, and it's shocking at times, and it's just so like immersive. I do have a couple of tabs in here, not really a lot, but I don't tab a lot of fiction books to begin with, so I feel like when I do tab a fiction book, that's when I know it's something that I'm really loving. If this is a classic that you've been putting off, or if you're somebody who doesn't read a lot of classics, I am the same way. This one, I will tell you, there is nothing to be afraid of with this one. Just go in and let yourself be captivated by the story and by the mystery and everything that's going on, because you will not regret it. Okay, coming in at number 9, maybe a surprise to you because it was a surprise to me, we have a romance book. The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I wasn't sure initially if this was going to be in my top 10, but the more that I thought about it when I was creating this list, I was like, I really did enjoy that book. I remember, like, this is one of those books that when I was reading it, like, I didn't want it to be over. Like, I wanted to read quicker because I wanted to read more of the story, but then I also wanted to take my time because I didn't want the story to end. I remember carrying this book around with me like wherever I went when I was reading it. This is a little romance that plays with time. We have a woman who is in love with a man from 7 years in the past, and he only appears in this apartment that has a magical quality to it. I think that's probably why this is such a standout for me, because I don't read a lot of romance, and oftentimes when I do read romance, I feel like a lot of things kind of follow the same storyline. Like, obviously, you know, okay, these are the two love interests, they're gonna have a conflict at some point, they're gonna get back together by the end, everything's gonna be happy and fine. But this one had like that added mixture of some magical realism, and I just kind of kept the story fresh and exciting, and I really loved the characters. These characters felt very real to me, and that is why it has stuck in my mind throughout the entire year. Coming in at number 8, my physical copy is currently on its way to me. This is Moonbound by Robin Sloan, which was a big surprise for me as well. This is a sci-fi fantasy. I was very nervous going into this because I know it takes place in a fantasy world and there is a wizard and all these other creatures, and it scared me a little bit because I don't read a lot of fantasy and I don't read a lot of heavy sci-fi fantasy. But this one I loved so much. We are following this young boy way far into the future, and he is under the rule of this powerful wizard, and he is living within this wizard's like kingdom. And he has this feeling inside that he was destined for something great, and he just sets off on this journey to figure out what that is. And during his journey, he runs into a lot of fun, exciting characters on the side. He also travels to a lot of interesting and unique worlds within this planet, and it was all really fun. There was also a touch of like space sci-fi in there as well. I just felt like every time you turn the page, there was something fun and new being introduced, and it just really kept the story very upbeat and very enjoyable, and it was also a little bit philosophical towards the end. It had great imagery. Once again, I loved all the characters as well. There is wizards, obviously, talking animals. There is this like elusive mystical being towards the end that becomes a big part of the story, and overall I just had a great time with this one. I don't really see a lot of people talking about this, so I would highly recommend it. Take it from me, if you are a sci-fi fantasy lover or somebody who's dabbling in that, I would definitely recommend this. Like I said, I was very nervous going into it, but I feel like the writing did a really good job of explaining everything, that I was never confused during the story or lost, which is something that I worry about sometimes going into fantasy. So if you're like me, this is my recommendation for a good sci-fi fantasy that won't have you very confused. Coming in at number 7 is Head Like a Hole by Andrew Van Wey, which is a cosmic horror. We are following a group of friends who were all kind of involved in something that happened in the past, and now that thing has come back to haunt them in a couple of different ways, and they are finding themselves in a fight for their lives and also to protect this secret between them. This has a lot of different tropes that I really enjoy in books. First of all, the whole idea of childhood friends coming back together and there's this dark secret in their past. I really love that trope. It also has a lot of good body horror. Once again, it's cosmic horror. The writing was the big standout for me in this one. It was so fantastic and so descriptive. The gory parts were just absolutely nasty, and I could picture everything that was happening very well, and I just was fully captivated by the story while I was reading it, and I would highly recommend this. Number 6 is another gross and nasty book. This is To Be Devoured by Sarah Tantlinger. I had high hopes for this novella going in, and then it just like blew me away even more than I expected. Like, I expected to love it, but then I loved it even more than that. This is a relatively short little novella. We are following a woman who kind of falls into this obsession with vultures and wanting to know what the vultures know, and she just kind of gets very obsessive about it, and she starts to crave what vultures eat, which is, you know, rotting flesh of dead animals, and she starts to consume that, and in this quest to figure out what the vultures know. We are also following her in her relationship with another woman. We are following her as she tries to work through a lot of her past traumas and goes to visit her therapist for that. This book was just downright nasty. It was so gross at some points, but the writing was stunning. This just had such beautiful writing. Like, I am obsessed with Sarah Tantlinger after this, and I want to read more from her, but I think the only things she has out is, I think there's like a poetry collection and then a couple of short stories and some other collections, but like, I want another novella or even a full-length novel from this author. This book was dark and it had a lot of themes of mental illness and trauma, and it's definitely going to be a heavy read for a lot of people, but this was just the perfect mixture of everything that I love when it comes to horror, like creepy and dark and grotesque and just this story of obsession, which is something I really enjoy. Okay, in number 5 we have I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones, which my physical copy is also on its way to me right now. The camera just very rudely died on me while I was talking about this. If you are someone who's not new to my channel, you've probably seen me talk about this book before. Stephen Graham Jones was really doing it for me this year. This is a story about a man reflecting on this period of his life where he became a teenage slasher. There's kind of like a supernatural element to this and reasoning for why this is happening to this person, but for the main story you are just following him as he goes around killing people, and it's really interesting. It's kind of a satire and a little bit of a twist on the slasher genre. It really gets up close and personal with a lot of tropes in the slasher genre and really analyzes those, and is very self-aware as a book because it's talking about these tropes, and it's like, this scene always happens in the slasher movie, and then, oh my god, this scene happens in the book. And it was really fun in that aspect of it. It was brutal and gory with the murder, but then it's also a story of this man's life, kind of a coming of age while he's going through this weird thing. It's also about his friendship and the people that are close to him during this time. It was just beautifully crafted, very well written. Stephen Graham Jones, it is no surprise to anybody that he's a very talented author. One thing, I've said it a million times this year, but I will say it again here, his attention to detail is the thing that blows me away. Like, he puts so much thought and detail into his books that there are small little things that you might think don't really mean anything or aren't really important to the story, but he brings those back in later on, and if you're paying close attention, you're like, wait a second, that was that thing mentioned here. And it's definitely, I think Stephen Graham Jones is just an author that you could read his books over and over again, but always gain something new just because of the amount of effort he puts into crafting these stories, and I just think this one was really, really well done. In the number 4 spot, we have The Fisherman by John Langan, which probably isn't a surprise to anybody. I've talked about this book a whole lot this year. We are following a man who has lost his wife, so he is grieving, and he learns of a coworker who has also gone through a tremendous loss in his life, and he reaches out to this guy, and they kind of strike up a friendship, and they bond over fishing. After this, then it kind of takes a weird turn where they are determined to fish at a certain spot that has a lot of like local legend and folklore around it. So this book does go heavily into legends and storytelling. There's a large portion of the book where we are listening to a story from a side character. So I don't think this is something that could work for everybody, because I can definitely understand if you get a little bit lost during that time, but then it brings it back at the ending. It was just so crazy. The horror was top tier. The descriptions of everything that was happening was top tier. Once again, the writing was so, so beautiful. The way that the author touched on grief and loss and the way that these men were affected by these things is just so beautiful. Grief is one of my favorite themes when it comes to horror, so it's really no surprise that I love this book. I don't have a physical copy of this one, and I'm really sad because once I get a physical copy, I know I'm gonna want to read it and annotate it, because it was just, there were so many beautiful quotes. Like, I knew within the first 10 or 15 pages of this book that it was gonna be a 5-star. Like, I just had this feeling. I was like, yeah, this is it. This is great. Okay. Can we get a little drum roll going for my top 3 books? Here we are, coming in at number 3, if I can pick it up. Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. This is another one of those that absolutely blew me away. I have never read from Ashley Winstead before, although I've kind of had my eye on her books over the years. And I remember this one coming out and I was really excited for it. And then I saw a lot of people giving it lower ratings and saying it was pretty much just Twilight fan fiction, and a lot of people weren't really enjoying it. So I initially picked it up expecting to hate it, and then came out absolutely obsessed with this book. This takes place in a small southern town where there has been a string of murders, basically, and we are following these 2 main characters as they are trying to figure out what is going on in this town. There's a lot of religious influence within the town, so there's a lot of commentary on that. There's also this local legend about a vampire, so of course a lot of the town folk are getting worked up about this and thinking that the vampire maybe is the killer, maybe he's real, and it has this very like southern gothic vibe to it. Like, the atmosphere was one of the biggest things that stood out to me in this story, and also the characters. Once again, these are characters that I feel like were very, very realistic. They felt like real people to me, and I loved to see their friendship and then eventually their romance develop through the story, and just the connection between the 2 of them. I found it to just be very powerful and very moving, and I just really, really enjoyed it. Along with a lot of the social commentary, like I talked about, the huge religious influence within this town and the way that our main female character has grown up in this town and things that she's been told and taught and kept from. You know, she is being kept there essentially by her parents. Although she wants to go out and she wants to get a higher education, she is not allowed to do those things. This is just one of those books. I knew it was going to be in my top 10 because literally ever since finishing it, this book has not left my mind. I don't know if there's been a day that's gone by that I haven't thought about this book. The story between the characters, the story of this town, and the way it all ends, I think was so well done, and I was absolutely blown away by Ashley Winstead's writing. So some of her other books are definitely a high priority for me next year, and I'm really, really happy that I was able to read this and love it. My number 2 book for 2024 was The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This is a very, very powerful and a very, very heavy horror story. This is one that I would say exercise caution before going into it because it does deal with a lot of very, very difficult topics. It is historical as well. In this book, we are following a Black family in Florida in 1950. The youngest member is 12-year-old Robbie, and he gets into a little bit of trouble with the law, and he gets sent away to a reform school for boys. This, I think, is really interesting because it's based off of a real school. It's called the Florida School for Boys, and it was open for over 100 years. And these boys are ripped away from their family and it's just sent into these horrible conditions where they are physically abused almost every single day. In this story, the particular boy that we're following has some talents and he is more sensitive to the paranormal, so he ends up coming into contact with ghosts while he's at this reformatory, and he works with them to help himself kind of jumpstart a plan to get out of the reformatory and be able to see his family again. It's also really interesting because we're following his family on the outside as well, who are working just as hard to get to see him and to get him out of there because they know it's just a horrible environment to be in. Both of the perspectives were equally fascinating and equally intriguing to me, so I really, really was happy about that. Once again, this is a very hard read. This had me feeling like every single emotion possible and just feeling absolute heartbreak at so many points during this book, especially knowing that it is historical fiction and it's based off of this real reform school where hundreds and thousands of kids have gone through a similar abuse, not only in America but also in Canada as well when you look at residential schools. And so Tananarive Due does a really good job of bringing a lot of attention to that, and she also has some things in the back of the book for further reading about the real stories and reading from victims themselves, people who have gone through this. And I think it's just really powerful messaging, really, really well done, and just a beautiful story. But once again, take your time reading this one. It is very hard-hitting and very emotional. Coming in at number 1, my best book for the year of 2024. Anybody who's been watching my channel this year will not be surprised because I will not stop talking about this book. I read it twice this year, and that is Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. Initially, I got this book as an ARC and I read it on my Kindle and was obsessed with it. So then I decided to pick up the audio version in October because I've heard a lot of people talk about how good the audio is, and it was very well produced and a great way to experience the story, but I would also recommend physically reading it. This follows a man who was involved in the filming of this movie called Horror Movie back in, I think it was the 90s, in 1993. I couldn't remember exactly which year. Things went wrong. It wasn't necessarily a cursed film, but it kind of has that vibe. Since then, the filmmakers have published 3 scenes from that movie on YouTube, and it just immediately racked up like this fan base, subreddits dedicated to a deep dive into this movie and its actors and what happened with it. Also, a lot of people trying to do remakes, whether professionally or homemade. So we are following the last surviving cast member from the original filming, and he is being approached to do a remake, I think 30 years in the future. This is one that had me hooked from the very, very beginning. I would say like the first 10 to 15 pages, again, I was like, this is so good, and my interest is piqued. Like, I am hooked. To me, this is really more than anything a story of obsession. We are watching our main character as he becomes more and more wrapped into this role of the Thin Kid, which was his official name for the movie, and that's all we ever know him throughout the book. He does not have a name, but we are just watching this deep obsession and him becoming just more and more into his character. It does jump around in the timeline. We also get a lot of chapters that are the actual screenplay from the movie, which I think is really, really fun. Of course, they're not accurate to how a real life screenplay would be, but it's not supposed to be like that anyways. The book does point that out, and I really, really enjoyed those parts. I think that was definitely the first time around. One of the things that really stood out to me is I really, really loved the screenplay and reading that, and every time that chapter would end, I'd be like, I just want to go back. I want to figure out like where this movie is going, what happens with it. I just really enjoyed this one. It's about friendship and death and loss, but also, once again, obsession, and I just think it was just fantastic. This is definitely one of those where it's very, I feel like people are either one side or the other. Like, you're either like me, where you're like 5 stars, I get it, I'm obsessed, or you're like, what's the point? There's no horror in this, and you give it 1 star. And I can definitely understand why people don't like this one, but for me, it just worked perfectly, and I was just so immersed in it the entire time. And there we have it. That is my list of my top 10 books from the year of 2024. If you've made it this far in the video, let me know what your top book of the year was, or something from your top 5 if you don't want to give away your #1 book. I'm just very curious to see. I'm always curious to see what you guys are reading, if you guys align with my tastes, and I just love to hear book opinions. With all of that being said, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you guys next time.